Good evening and welcome to another Pharaoh stream with myself, Pharaoh. And today we are going to be looking at interwar art at the Royal Academy, Part 4, 19 to 23. And in fact, what I'm firstly going to do is make Wi-Fi because I can see there's lag. Give me a second. Should be a little bit better now. And we've been looking through year by year at the different art at the Royal Academy. Some interesting pieces so far, but I think in my opinion, from 1923, there's a definite shift. We're starting to get a little bit more edgy pieces, a little bit more interest, a bit more of a definite feel. People have recuperated. There's some great new faces that have appeared as well. So let's just get cracking. Quite a few. We're up to, I think this year has 26 different pieces here. So I've only got an hour, so I'm going to have to rattle off some of these. So let's start off with this interesting piece, which is finally, I've had several messages. People have been saying, where's the diversity? Pharaoh, where's the diverse art? And finally, we have the Honourable Prince and Princess. I'll get her name right. Get their name right. Shimadzu by J.J. Shannon. So if you remember, that's the American based in England. And, I think this is a relatively nice piece from Shannon. They've got Shimadzu dressed up in his finery. But I think actually it's the wife here that looks, very beautiful in her kind of standard Oriental garb. A little bit of interest if you're interested in it about the actual sitter. So this is Shimadzu Tadashige, and he's basically like a princeling from one of the Japanese clans. He was associated with the Japanese Navy and actually went to England and of his own expense from December the 21st, 1921 to 1923. So again, if you remember, we were friends with the Japanese at this time. England and Japan had the longest peace treaty, like naval peace treaty in Asia at that time. So strong relations there, and this was obviously like a part fact finding, part kind of keeping the bonds strong between the two countries. When he came back, he ended up becoming an instructor at the Naval War College and was actually promoted to be commander at the time, and then went on to almost be like an ambassador to England. And obviously, we don't get that many kind of foreigners in these kind of pictures and portraits and pictures. So it's kind of an interesting piece here. But I think, like I said, Shimadzu kind of comes off here as a little bit standoffish here. There's kind of quite reserved pose. He's holding onto a sword, again, kind of showing the military element. But again, I think it's the treatment of the princess here, which has this kind of nobility and refinement and delicateness. But there's a kind of hidden beauty at the same time, and I think he's managed to capture that very well without over orientalizing her at the same time. So nice Kickstarter piece here. Okay, let's do number 2. This is Sidney Lee's Birth of a River. Again, I think this is just kind of really re-emphasizing Lee's thoughts about the kind of rocky landscape, really. And again, if you think about classic English landscape, Turner is contemplating the sea, Constable, the countryside and country life, and Sidney Lee is definitely something else here. And I think we've got this very dramatic kind of rock formation here, but also you can see the kind of cave being worn away by the river. So there's this interesting juxtaposition of the kind of stillness of the river, but also its power to erode even the strongest of rocks here. And again, something interesting caught my eye. Shame we couldn't get a colour photo. There's not that many colour pictures of the Sydney Lees, unfortunately, and I think again he's a great colourist in terms of his landscape ability. But yeah, nice. This one is a little bit different here, and it's by Frederick Cayley Robinson, another English artist. He was kind of in the kind of pre-Raphaelite vein, born 1862, so he would have been caught up with the kind of mid-phase. If you think about your Burne-Joneses, that's kind of who he's analogous with. But again, he has this kind of later period beyond his arts and crafts style, and does a series of, you would describe this as kind of like modernist graphical style. Again, we've seen this style pop up a few times with someone like Reginald Frampton and Griffinhagen as well. But and again, this is kind of like, I would say, out of the Pouvry Knopf school of illustrative symbolism, basically. Now, this piece itself is kind of interesting. That there was a nice little excerpt that I got from the Royal Academy itself about this, so I thought I'd just read it out verbatim, if you wouldn't mind, because it was quite good. When Robinson painted Youth, he would have certainly known that the topic shell shock was upmost in the minds of the British public. Through its subject and title, the work looks back to the physical and mental state preceding adulthood. Again, the piece is called Youth, I believe. Yeah, just called Youth. But for Robinson, it was retrospective in two other significant ways. First, the work recapitulates the painting from 1907 with the same title, and in the 1923 version adds a social dimension with buildings and people in the distance. Secondly, and more importantly, the pose has been altered slightly and the right arm lifted away from the body, so now it appears almost an exact quotation of Rodin's early masterpiece, L'Âge de Reine, The Age of Bronze. And basically it goes on to say that it was donated to the Victoria and Albert Museum in 1914. Just as a note, anyone who follows me on Twitter, it's still there now and it's on display, so it's really worth checking out. Age of Bronze, brilliant piece, although it was surrounded by nonsense when I last went down there. Anything else to say on this one? Anyway, so it's kind of interesting that basically the fact that Cayley is kind of looking back on some of his previous works here, but also the kind of inspiration of Rodin. And again, you can see it's kind of like the bronze made flesh here. In terms of the actual piece itself, this is all about verticals. Again, look at all of the trees going up, so the body's going up. But there's a bit of balancing with horizontals, so you get this kind of interesting square piece. The fact that the tree across here on the left is in the foreground is kind of drawing our eye away from it, but so that makes it a little bit interesting and a bit different. I guess we're asking the question: who is the youth? What is he doing? Is he kind of enjoying the sunshine here? This is the kind of blossom of youth. And you can see this somewhat with the kind of buds in the trees as well, this hint of winter and then greenery coming through. So again, I think it is this reflection on the First World War and the first shoots of greens coming back, life returning to England again, and the kind of virility of that. Color scheme wise, it's all tied into a yellow, blue, green triad. But I think this is a lovely piece, really powerful. Really nicely presented, and the rendering on the tree, for example, is particularly nice. So definitely a standout piece for me this year. Right, we've got another J.J. Shannon piece here, and it's just called Portrait of a Lady. I just want to apologise. This is definitely one of the blurriest photos that I took. So sorry about that. But it's quite captivating. There's definitely some kind of mystery to it at the same time. The pose is kind of interesting, where he's got her leaning against this chair across there. But I won't say much more on this, but just another nice piece. Now, we haven't had a Morley for a while, and it's interesting that we've got this one coming up. Now, this is like Morley kind of goes through like that early stage, and I think this is him settling in his kind of style beyond this. I still feel in terms of the kind of configurations, it's very Renaissance, like Cinquecento, Quinquecento focused, where you've got these kind of strong buildings placed in the backgrounds, the use of perspective through tiles, etc. And then, but then he sort of updates it with this kind of more kind of modern feel, more kind of like there's like a naturalness to it at the same time. And the kind of the rendering itself has this the kind of sculptural modernism I kind of been going on about the last couple of times, where the again the skin, there is no kind of blemishes on there. There's just the kind of smoothness, but without some of the kind of extreme decoisms of Dupin. The piece is obviously entitled Vanity. And the focus is on this woman in the middle across here, and she's looking after her hair, and having it done by her companion. So again, she's kind of lost in her own looks across here. There's a few other bits of business. There's some kind of interesting, like she's obviously part dressed and she's going to wear a coat over the top. So she's got this kind of very fine outfit in silks and embroidery, etc. We've got the kind of two pooties here. One kind of putting rose petals into water, some kind of like eau de toilette. You've got this one here holding a mirror, and she's looking down directly into it, admiring herself and her hair, as Vanity would. But we've got maybe like a symbolism of the kind of fool here, this troubadour playing on towards these women while a monkey looks on. So maybe the kind of this is the folly of vanity. And interestingly, we see these kind of society women in the background. So maybe this is a little bit of a dig with the kind of uppermost society. Also, this is all staged in like a broken down house. So again, maybe this is metaphorical for England, where England is the broken down house, but still we focus ourselves on looking good and fixing our hair, as opposed to fixing the foundations of society itself. Maybe. Okay, we've got another Lavery here. So again, Lavery's still not quite getting into his own style now, but the sitter was kind of interesting. This is Grace Curzon, Marchioness Curzon of Kedleston. So again, for those who know this kind of time period, Curzon is quite a famous and important figure, both politically and like from a kind of a member of society. He was governor of India viceroy of India for a long time. She is in fact the second wife of Curzon, and actually they had problems in their marriage as well. Interestingly, the Curzons are associated with Mosley as well, and he had an affair with both this lady Curzon and two of her daughters, the absolute dog. Now, interestingly, so this is 23. You can tell that Curzon wasn't happy with this painting, because she then went on to get Sargent to paint her picture a couple of years later. So obviously not happy with this piece, but I thought the sitter was interesting. Put her in profile, but then has a kind of awkwardly leaning in three quarters here. So a little bit tricky, but I think the piece is nice, and there's lots of details going on by Lavery here. So I think a decent picture overall. Okay, we've got another piece from Cadogan Cooper here. Again, if you remember, Cadogan is the kind of pre-Raphaelite, last of the pre-Raphaelite, but also does this kind of these society portraits on the side. And this is Frances, daughter of Major General John Capper. And again, this was kind of interesting because this is the kind of the kind of new youth sprouting through, just like the kind of youth we saw in the earlier piece here. And he set her up very much like some of, if you ever see any of his pre-Raphaelite women, they're kind of sitting down, they're very centralized, staring right at you. But he's not relying on the kind of the fineries of medievalism. It's just about the kind of beauty and innocence of the girl herself. You can tell that she's young. She's not painted in a sexual manner at all. It's just the beauty and the innocence of youth here, and the kind of loveliness of young girls, which I thought was really nice, as a kind of a sweet. But also, I think he balances where it's not too kind of saccharine. It's not kind of like young girls frolicking or whatever like that. So that there is a kind of like a grown up nature to her at the same time, but like I said, still and a strength. You can tell her that she's the daughter of a general. And what I like, what he's done is to create a bit of interest by wrapping her in ermine, or maybe this is one of her coats that he's taken off the shoulders onto the top here, and it acts as this kind of protective barrier. They've got her wearing this kind of like very unfitted dress as well. And again, it's all about kind of purity. Ermines are as well, they're associated with purity in the medieval and Renaissance world as well. So maybe he's kind of hinting at that. And her hair kind of bound up off the shoulder. I mean, compositionally, it's really beautiful. I like it. There's a lot of weight at the bottom, but they're not obviously, they're kind of focus in central, some verticals, and the ermines are almost like a flower with her kind of appearing out of it. So the first flowering of this young girl. So really nice piece here. Okay, we've got something a little bit different from a guy called Sam Milton Fisher, born 1859, so he's 65 at this time, 64. Another Lambeth schoolboy, had some success, moved to Paris and then came back. And this is, again, another kind of society portrait, but still kind of interesting. This is Miss Ness. So I couldn't find much information about the sitter, unfortunately. But kind of interestingly, got her sitting down in 3/4. And again, this is talking about the kind of the new woman here. This is clearly she's very powerful. She's literally got the keys to the house here in her hand, so she's kind of showing off her authority. Her head is kind of up and aloof, and of course the kind of Edwardian swan-like neck here. That's making its mark and showing that she's a real society beauty at the same time. So again, just a nice portrait. Not too much depth here. Now we've got another Philpott here, and again, I think this is another one of his significant works and one of the best pieces of the year. And the piece is entitled Penelope. I mean, it's immediately obvious that the kind of the homoeroticism of the piece coming out and Philpott's tendencies, but it's been relatively well balanced. It's within good taste, and the piece itself is obviously talking about the suitors who are trying to win Penelope's hand in marriage here. And when talking about the Odyssey and Odysseus, the suitors don't really feature that much. I mean, I've seen several paintings by Penelope, or you'll see the suitors being slaughtered. That's the kind of context. And what we've got here is like a focus on the kind of suitors trying to seduce Penelope here. So couple of pieces here. We've got a woman on the left-hand side, and I think we can tell it's Penelope because you can see her sewing her tapestry. And of course, the story goes, she says to the suitors, as soon as finish whatever weaving this tapestry, I will decide who I'm going to marry. But in the night, she unweaves and unpicks her pieces, and the suitors are so drunk and full that they never really understand what's going on. And she's looking up at the suitor across here, but Philpott's put her face quite readily in view to us as well. We've got three of the figures here. One, the ginger looking directly down. We've got the suitor at the back holding himself up, and we've got this third one across here. So there's a couple of immediate things that you're drawn to. I think the actual piece itself is very stark here. I mean, you can look at this kind of rocky land. The ground is barren, and there's not much kind of lush vegetation that you'd expect. There's a couple of fig trees kind of poking through at the same time up here, and you can see this suitor across here reaching up to pluck the last fig from this. You can see this this fig tree has literally had its leaves pulled apart and stripped bare. So again, this kind of showing the kind of the desolation that's been brought by the suitors. Now, Philpot's put him in a really tricky position, his head looking up here, and again, that's really hard to draw. So again, showing off his skills, but also he captures the silhouette of the suitor really nicely through this. Some would say way too way too tight top onesie that finishes just at the crotch level, and this is that. There's that kind of homoeroticism there for you, but the rendering is really beautiful here, and again, it's a lovely silhouette, very confrontational, but the confrontation is kind of taken away by looking up. Now we've got this kind of grumpy suitor across in the corner here. You can see he's a bit upset. He's lost one of his shoes. There's an interesting kind of plop across down by the river, so maybe he's kind of been playing with stones or whatever. But you can see he's basically fed up with the situation. And again, really beautifully rendered, really nice figure. I mean, just in terms of the style, it's a little bit more of his kind of graphic symbolist style, but also it's very loosely painted. I mean, this could be like an impressionist painting, like a Gauguin or something like that. But I would say that he has a lot more depth and control of kind of muscle and shadow. Like this, look at this thigh here with some of the kind of the light reflecting off against the bottom of the thigh. Really nice. Now we have the suitor who's nearest to Penelope, and again wearing this ridiculous cloak, only like butt cheek poking out, and he's about to present to her like a little flower as part of a seduction. And again, it's just so small and pathetic, and I think it partly shows how despoiled the island has been on, but also the suitor's inability to bring anything. You know, these guys are freeloaders, they're grifters. Yes, they they're young, vital men, but what are they bringing really that would capture Penelope's interest? You know, they're just plucking the last desperate fruits from Ithaca and giving it back to the queen who already owes them. So I think it shows nicely that like their position. I mean, the pose itself is very confident here. You know, he's leaning across the door, legs folded. Very very cocksure, very confident in himself. Now at the back here, just to say, we've got some figures here, two people looking out. It's hard to tell who are they. I like to think that it is his son, who I've forgotten. Anyway, people in chat can remind me, and his old servant looking out, constantly waiting for Odysseus to arrive. And you can see the kind of boat here giving again that kind of remembrance of Odysseus on his travels. But I just love, firstly, just that the scene itself has been so well rendered, but also the imagination of Ithaca as this kind of high cliffed island. In my head, it was always kind of flat and kind of Mediterranean-y, but I think he's put a really nice twist on it with all of this set up. Colors wise, definitely rooted in kind of blues and greens, but the occasional bit of red poking out, like you can see the kind of the pink of the flowers here. Really exceptional piece, I think, and really nice from Philpot. It's a very subtle work, and I think he gets away with the overt eroticism in the piece, and it's contained still. So yeah, another top piece for the year. Okay, we've got another Frank Dixie piece here, the Honourable Mrs. Harper. Interesting piece here. It's another one of his kind of sitting down, looking off into the distance kind of pieces, a bit more tangible. Like I also like some of the attention to detail. You can tell that Dixie is this kind of arts and crafts pedigree with the kind of detailed background. And but he's done some nice stuff with the sitter where he's got her playing with her pearls in one hand and holding some gloves with the other, and it gives it that kind of interest and maybe she's waiting for someone is what you say. There's a kind of a playfulness and a lovelornness, and she's kind of presenting us with her ring as well. So maybe this is like a love painting, and she's called Mrs. Harris as well. So this is maybe like a nice portrait to remind her husband that she's waiting for him. So yeah, nice one from Dixie. Okay, we've got another Orpen, but this time it's not a portrait. It's one of his kind of historical genre pieces, and this was a commission by the set-up Imperial War Museum, and known as the Unknown British Soldier. So, at this time, I think they were still kind of pulling up and erecting the last kind of memorials from the war, and I think they wanted a piece for. Well, Orphan had this concept for a soldier um, that's like an everyman, rather than putting someone in there or a memorial of a regiment. What about a memorial for everyone? And so this is the idea of the unknown soldier, the body of a real human being, but we don't someone who's kind of lost through the the havoc of war. And again, I think he's set the position up at Versailles. So again, this is almost like working in dialogue with the other Versailles piece. But rather than the finery and the kind of pomp of all of the politicians, we have this kind of stripped back where the kind of coffin sits on an English flag, the old Tommy's hat on top across here, and he's placed into a corridor with the kind of golden light ahead. So, and you can faintly see a cross in the distance as well. So remembering, heaven, etc. And you've got this kind of juxtaposition of the kind of pomp and finery of Versailles with the kind of the black darkness of the space across there. Now, you may notice the two strange figures either side. In his initial drawing, in his initial picture, he wanted to include these kind of figures. Sorry about that. I think I was just on mute for the last part. Apologies. I will cut that out of the live version of the recorded version. So sorry about that. So you can see the two figures either side now. These kind of deluded, deranged men with a pair of putti above it. Now these are actually taken from one of his other works, which has these kind of shell-shocked individuals in a desert, and I think he was basically wanted to include it to kind of highlight the kind of pain and the madness of war itself. Now, again, Orpen, as you may gather, has a bit of a reputation now of cocking a snook to society, and this really infuriated the Imperial War Museum. They demanded, they said they wouldn't accept the commission with these in, so he eventually painted them out. I mean, I would say the painting does look better without the figures inside, but you know, its point in terms of the actual piece itself being you know, it needs to include the madness of war as much as the celebration of the soldier. So it's not just this kind of purely propagandic act, is also important. And I think Orpen captures that well. Okay, let's go to another Reed Dick piece, and this is called Pastoral. Again, there's some elements of Mestrovich here with some of the kind of wrapped up cloth, but the actual figure herself is very much rooted in the kind of new sculpture traditions, with her looking out into the distance, head bound. But it's kind of like a nice take on like a pastoral scene, you know, a farmer's wife or whatever. That kind of bound nature, giving it a bit of interesting modernism to it, and obviously he renders the figure really nicely, really beautifully. But you know, just a good quality piece of work. Now, this is another Reed Dick piece, and it's what was actually submitted was the model version of this, and this is Lord Kitchener's tomb. So obviously, Kitchener being vitally important for the kind of planning of the First World War, for the kind of politicizing, and also kind of recruitment. You know, the kind of Kitchener pointing at the pointing towards you propagandic image. And I believe this is in St Paul's, in his own separate tomb. I mean, I'd say the actual tomb itself. Let's look at the sculpture. You know, obviously Reed Dick does a great job in terms of likeness, and they've got Kitchener here kind of laid out his famous moustache. This is very Zoomer coded right now. Kitchener, the original Gen Z, he's lying down, sleeping in peace, wrapped up at the same time with a cloak here, and they've got him in his kind of his military garb, holding the rod of authority at the same time. So I think Reed Dick's done a fine job in terms of just capturing his likeness. In terms of the rest of the tomb itself, because again, I think it's so important to consider that. I would say it's nice, but nothing mind-blowing. Again, that there's some really nice detailing here on the kind of cushion with the tassels and this kind of almost oriental headrest. But I think Reed Dick's played this quite safe. Definitely good, but I much prefer, if you see Alfred Gilbert's his tomb, heavily inspired by the Vischer family. I mean, it's outlandish and totally insane, but it's you know, one of a kind. Well, I feel like this Kitchener piece is kind of more it's just kind of playing it safe, really. So yeah, another nice piece here from Dick. And again, another piece from Olsen that was decent. This is a Golden Summer, Cornish Coast. He loves his like two words plus talking about Cornwall, basically. Another kind of impressionistic piece here. Right, something a little bit different now. Now, I mentioned about Pegram who was kind of the Thornycroft's student and apprentice. We've now got a piece from Thornycroft himself, born 1850. So again, he is like 73 at the time. Trained at the Royal Academy. Spent a little bit of time in France, but because of his connections with the RA and also society in general, he is kind of like one of the kind of he's the most popular society sculptors of the age. Again, personally, for me, Hamo is not the best. He's associated with new sculpture. I mean, certainly if you think about, I would describe like new sculpture having like three prongs or three kind of nodes of energy that they're drawing from. One is clearly kind of like Renaissance art, specifically kind of like Michelangelo and Donatello. They're also drawing from some Gothic elements, but there's also I think the third prong is kind of maybe like allegorical neoclassicism. So actually, it's a bit more Renaissancey, and depending on the sculptor, they kind of draw more or less from there. Hamo is very much in the kind of Renaissance vein. He's the most kind of bog standard and doesn't tend to do the kind of more interesting kind of like Gothic Renaissance pieces like something like Gilbert does. But here we have courage bringing victory. I mean, it's interesting in terms of obviously the face here is very well rendered here. Here is courage, and I think it's a she here. It's hard to tell. And you can see victory is in her hand here as a kind of a meta sculpture, and I quite like that. Courage has also got a sword kind of tucked in and this interesting kind of Renaissance shaped square shield, and then holding some kind of it's very hard to tell. It looks like a branch or a plume, probably with some kind of symbolic meaning here. I mean, the actual piece itself is beautifully rendered, really nicely done by Thornycroft, but I feel like the kind of symbolism is a bit weak, and also I don't really like the kind of outfit of Courage in the dress. Yes, obviously amazing skill and consummate detail here, but it's just not very interesting. I think it actually pulls away, while someone else like Fair here or someone like that would maybe render her in a suit of armor, for example, and I think that would be a bit more powerful. But still, nice sculpture nonetheless. Thornycroft is going to die in a couple of years' time, so this is really one of his last works. Now let's go on to something a little bit more interesting here, and okay, I got to be honest here. I'm very, very biased towards this artist, Charles Ricketts. Huge fan of his. Now, Ricketts is kind of famous for a number of reasons. He is, I would describe him as like a designer, critic, but also like an organizer in the kind of Roger Fry vein. Like he's very important for the international group. And this is he also does a series of oils. Now, most people, if you look up Ricketts today, focus on some of his work with like dress design and theatre design, but it's actually his oil paintings that I think are totally amazing and brilliant. And I've spent some time on actually reading around some of his art criticism books. He's really interested in the French symbolist Moreau and often talks about him. And having read through that in that context, seeing some of his work, you can really see. I think Ricketts is kind of like the closest inheritor of Moreau's work that's out there, and pushes it further and puts it into some really interesting places. So Ricketts, because of his kind of breadth as an artist, often gets kind of lumped in with the theatre design, but apparently, but basically during the 1910s, he leads the international group which is called, I think it's like the International Group of Sculptors, Painters, and Engravers, something like that, but it's called the International. And they're kind of like a bit of a vanguard against Edwardian academicism. But after the war, Ricketts and Shannon, his lover, are sort of taken in. And the work that we'll see from this point on for the next 10 years is kind of Ricketts doing his Moreau thing in a really interesting way. So again, this instantly feels like, again, straight out of Moreau, just in terms of the kind of the way he's using the canvas, going for a portrait shape, but then giving us lots of full figure pieces in these kind of dramatic landscapes. This piece itself is called The Return of Eurydice. So obviously the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Eurydice gets taken away from him, and with various stories about her descent. I think she stands on an asp, as the usual. It's the most common explanation of how she dies. And her lover, Orpheus, the great poet who has the ability to kind of make animals fall asleep and make plants blossom where he goes down to the underworld. And so this is the moment of return of Eurydice, and he's about to turn behind and send her away. So we've got a couple of figures here. Eurydice here on the right hand side, Orpheus with his lyre in his hand holding up, and Mercury knowing what's going to happen here. So the actual piece itself has this kind of various levels of interest. That the landscape itself, again, reminds me of something like Moreau's Oedipus and the Sphinx, for example. These kind of rocky landscapes, colorful shot skies with kind of clouds molding together. You can see the kind of the lava in the background showing the kind of underworld nature. And Eurydice is kind of holding out her hand, fainting at Orpheus here. And I think this is, again, showing what's about to happen, because he throws himself off a cliff and then dies, doesn't he? So I think maybe there's a bit of foreshadowing here with the kind of the foam of the waves crashing against here. It's a very somber piece, very melancholic, but again, this is about the colours and the actual landscape of the piece are really really powerful, and I really like it. Now this is going to be a triple of Ricketts pieces here. This is called the Chimeras. Now again, the Chimeras have different different meaning to different stories, but I think this might be from Dante, but I could be wrong. I think this is one of the tortures from hell, where you've got these kind of figures sitting and standing on top of the men. Again, very Moreau inspired in terms of like the color scheme, the kind of deep blues, the yellows. Moreau has these kind of like again quite high value high value paintings, while Ricketts tends to, I'd say the big differentiation is that Moreau renders a lot tighter, while Ricketts is, again, he is inspired by the old masters, as well as this big old masters vein coming through, and you can see he's doing kind of quite loose painting, but the effects that he's managing to get are really quite beautiful. Like, I love this the feathers of the wing of this chimera across here. You can see all the delightful plumes and the detail, but there's a dark subtlety to it at the same time. The figures, very well rendered. Definitely not having the same kind of strength of rendering as Philpott, for example, but still really nice pieces. Like, I love this guy in the background here, almost manneristic in his kind of stretched out nature as well. My favorite of the pieces is this one here from the kind of Trojan women. So again, the famous Aeschylus play, where it's all about kind of the women who have been kind of captured and turned to slaves by the various Greeks. I think it's based in Athens in the play, and I'm pretty sure this is them going to Greece in boats as slaves. So it's this kind of moment of tragedy, moment of sadness, reflection, and a lot of the faces are turned away from us. I think that you've got this kind of sadness and kind of deep tragedy. These two kind of calling out to the gods, etc. But I think we're kind of mainly drawn to the woman in blue here, maybe. 'Cause I think some of the royalty do survive, like I'm going to say Priam's wife, I believe, survives. So maybe that's her. I really like this sad little baby here being held up by one of the mothers. Maybe she's considering dropping them into the sea. But again, this kind of the back of the nude here on the left hand side, really beautifully rendered. Color scheme again, really nice. This is kind of like rooted in reds and blues, but the kind of red itself is like this dark crimson, so it's got this kind of foreshadowing and the kind of the sadness of that, and then the blue of the sky kind of giving you these kind of pale, very sickly figures at the same time. So a really nice trio of rickets. Let me see if there's anything else to say on rickets. Oh, here, he was born in Geneva. That was one interesting thing. Born 1866. So that's he's like 50s, 57 or 58 at this point. So it's like relatively old, but not too old compared to some of them. Just in terms of his character, he was very glorious. Like Shannon's the reserved one, and he's the kind of noisy one. Oh yeah, also he's the driving force behind the Veil Press, which again is my second favorite private press after Kelmscott, basically. Okay, on to the next piece, and that is Shannon's Wounded Amazon. Now, like again, I haven't been loving like Shannon's work's interesting in the fact that it definitely stands out from some of the more boring pieces, but I often find it to be a bit too sentimental, a bit too kind of like 17th century, but like worse. This was one of his better pieces, which is the Wounded Amazon, and it's a piece that he does return back a few times to. You have this kind of mannish female here. You can tell she's an Amazon because she's got her breast revealed, and also she's wearing these greaves on the bottom to protect her body, and she's obviously been hit by an arrow, and she's kind of withdrawing it from the cut here. You can see the arrowhead. So it's this moment of like savage healing, but I just love that her face is just totally unmoved by the pain, showing her kind of strength. Again, maybe ties into this kind of new woman thing, the barbs of modernity being withdrawn with ease to the modern woman here. So I think it shows like and maybe a reflection on like motherhood and the effect of the war on women as well, who are having to create arms for the men and survive in a world without without men during the war. So really nice piece. I think he has a good pose. Again, it's a tricky pose because it's got her sitting down with her legs out. So you got the foreshortening on that, but it feels good. A very awkward pose with the arm as well, but it's been done really nicely. And then we've got a bit of interest in the background, almost pre-Raphaelite-esque. I mean, this is kind of like pre-Raphaelite-esque, I would say, but obviously with a classical treatment at the same time. But definitely one of Shannon's better pieces, I think. Okay, let's go back to Reggie Frampton, the kind of Glasgow-esque kind of symbolist. There's something about the kind of rendering here that immediately maybe makes me think of Jean Deville or Delville. Here we've got this piece is entitled, sorry, it's got a funny name, 1 second. Our Lady of the Lunar Rainbow, that's some Dark Souls nonsense right there. But obviously it's the Lady Mary with Jesus, but the idea of the lunar rainbow I thought was really cool, very evocative. So you can see the rainbow appearing during the night time. And a couple of interesting things. You can see the Christ child here. There's a bit of an optical illusion here because it looks like he's just sort of hovering in front of her. But Frampton's put him directly on a tree, which lines up perfectly with her dress. So when you look a bit closer, you can see he's kind of sitting on the kind of swaddling of the tree. And the tree itself is then, having touched the Christ child, is blossoming in these lovely blooms, and Mary is holding on behind. She's kind of been encircled by the lunar rainbow. And then down below, we've got these kind of crocuses springing through, and like a Bethlehem-esque town in the background. So again, I'm not sure. This is definitely not a biblical theme, of course, but in terms of the symbology of it, the crocuses are like the first flowering, the first flowers. There's some snowdrops in there as well. So there's the kind of implication of a winter scene, but despite it being kind of early winter, we've got the kind of the spring cherry blossoms coming through. How does that happen? Well, it's through the life and vitality of the Christ child coming in contact with this tree. The kind of the area that she's kind of stepping on itself is interesting because the tree is sitting on almost like a weird island. They're both sitting on this kind of very curved earth-esque plot of green, and there's this kind of city behind. So I was wondering whether this was kind of like a reference to like Earth at the front, and then the background is the New Jerusalem, the worlds to come, a hint of the many mansions that Christ has ready for us, something like that. Or maybe it's kind of like a reflection on Bethlehem. But compositionally, it's a little bit nouveau with this kind of like long tall tree, but I think it's really rather wonderful and definitely one of Frampton's best pieces. You've got the kind of Gothic-esque, fully circular rainbow. Someone like I'm trying to think of a name now. Like Pisanello has like a fully circular rainbow in one of his paintings, for example, or you'll often see in like John the Revelation Gothic pieces, you've got the kind of full circular rainbow being used as a portal to another realm. So that's why I was wondering whether the city in the background is the New Jerusalem. And then Mary's face herself is very, very composed. This hand across here is a little bit awkward, but I think the other one's rendered nicely, and I really love the fabric, which has an almost kind of pointillist-esque rendering all the way down it. So all in all, I think it's a really lovely piece here from Reggie. Top work. One of the better bits of the show. Okay, next one is a relatively new artist, Laura Knight. So she is going to become one of the most well-recognized female artists of her generation, to such a degree that she ended up becoming a dame. She is also part of the Knight power couple, her and Harold, who is her husband, but also a portraitist and a painter in his own right. I think they've become like one of the biggest artistic duos of the century, even I believe. Now, Laura's work in general, I would say, is a combination of, she does portraiture, she does kind of like genre, but it's always through the female lens. She's very much focused on like women's life, but not in like a crass kind of way. I think it's always done very tastefully, and she, I think she's just giving that kind of female view on living. She's also, this is really random, she's also obsessed with the circus, and there's a very well-known circus painter. So like all of the circus work, I have to say, just looks so cheesy now. But you know how like I don't really know the context of this, but in the 20s and 30s, there is a definite like circus vibe going on, big clown taking control. If you see a lot any kind of, I always think of like Nana pottery at this time. If you ever got a grandmother that used to collect ceramics, they would always have one or two kind of circus pieces that were always creepy and always weird. Laura Knight, I think, is a key proponent in in propagating that. However, I think she does a lot. The kind of genre female stuff is pretty good, and some of her portraits are quite nice as well. And even some of her circus paintings are decent when they're not too cheesy. I would say during the second, like basically, she is definitely like an early example of DEI, where her poor husband, who I think is the better artist, doesn't really get. I think he does get knighted, to be fair, but she literally gets to become a dame, even though she's the weaker of the artist of the two. But just because she's a woman, I think it's definite DEI rating. She also produces some of the most cringe-inducing, like whatever the Rosie Riveter-esque powerful women at work during the Second World War propaganda artist, and I just don't have any time for any of that nonsense. It's just absolute propagandic slop. So it's kind of interesting how Laura. It doesn't happen yet, but I think within a couple of years she becomes a dame, and the wokeness starts to take control. But despite all of that, I think we should evaluate her in the context of all these other artists, and she does produce some really nice pieces. This one is called A Daughter of Eve. It's just obviously a young woman, and I think she's kind of captured the kind of youth. There's obviously a happiness, of frivolity to the piece. It's very, very casual. Laura set her down behind this kind of black background, which is kind of creaking away. So it's not it's as far away from the kind of formal Sargent society paintings that you could get. There's very, very, very casual. Even the pose. Think about something like let's see if I can bring up that. So something like the Shannon across here, where again, like it's all about finery and poise and nobility, while Daughter of Eve is just this kind of like fun. She's kind of happy. She's playing with a fruit bowl as well, so that there's a casualness to it, and a youthfulness and a freshness, a down to earthness, as you would say. So again, I feel like Laura definitely, she's kind of like part of this new wave of artists coming through, giving us that like anti-society basically, and in some ways I think represents like if you think about it, with it by about 1925, empire has really started to dissolve, and the kind of the reformers are definitely at the door. The middle group I mentioned in the landscape piece, and Laura, I think, represents the artistic ambitions of them. Now let's move on to what I think is maybe another standout piece from this year, and this is by Meredith Frampton. Now I mentioned we've got Reggie Frampton, who is the nephew of George, the sculptor. Meredith is his full name is George Vernon Meredith Frampton, but obviously his dad is called George, so he called himself Meredith. He is actually the son of Frampton. Now, obviously, what's quite good is I think it's always difficult when the son follows the same artistic pathway of the father. So it's kind of good that he ended up as a painter rather than a sculptor. Frampton, in my opinion, is top 3 new sculpture guys. So he's got a great pedigree. Meredith started learning at the Royal Academy schools. Served during the First World War, but managed to get into the RA from the 1920s. He's also associated with the Art Workers Guild, which I've been to recently. The traditional architecture group was hosting some awards, and a friend of mine managed to get me in, which was great. But randomly, Frampton was the president of that for a year, so it's obvious, it's unsurprising that they had that connection. Now Meredith is interesting because he mainly does portraits, but he does the sculptural modernism thing very well. And again, if you go to the National Portrait Gallery or Tate Britain, you will instantly know his works. They really stand out, and they have a definite style. The only thing I would say about his works is they're a little bit samey. But I mean, as if you mainly do portraiture, it's gonna be like that. This is Ida and Joan, daughters of J.M. Gatty, Esquire. Couldn't find much information about them, but basically, again, there's these two young women, one kind of looking towards us. Again, I wouldn't say confrontationally. There's kind of like a nervousness to her, but she's got her hand on her hip, stick thin here, obviously very young. And then they kind of the other girl sort of looking off into the distance here, casually sitting down with another feather in her hand. Again, maybe reminiscent of Strang. You know, it's all about the feather business here. Now Meredith has got. It's interesting because we've got the kind of the textures going on from the dresses, the hats. Look at all of the detailing on this fabric across here, but it's juxtaposed with the simplicity of the background. Like Meredith loves to put people in these kind of like almost like 3D rendered spaces. Very, very, very simple, very, very smooth. Like this is actually a bit more detailed than he ends up doing, and he's got a couple of famous pieces. But I really like this, and this is a good debut from Meredith, showing his ability to kind of render and to draw people accurately, but also showing his distinct and unique modern style that really stands out from the rest of the portraits. The other thing I would say is that again, it has that kind of informalism of Laura Knight, although not as much. That I mean, these are still two society girls, but they're not kind of in these kind of like heavily velveted backgrounds. They're kind of sitting down in a place where it could be anyone's home, basically. But yeah, really nice. Just 1 second. Sorry, I'm over the hour time now, so I'm going to try and scoot on quickly through these last bits. So another banger here, right at the end of the day, by Gilbert Bays.